Daniel here. I'm excited today to be joined by Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson. Professor Jefferson is going to speak with us a little bit about her research, and together we're going to talk about an exciting project that we collaborated on. So to begin, I'm going to do a quick introduction of Professor Jefferson, and then we'll get into some of the questions that I have for her. Professor Jefferson is a third-generation Californian. Presently, her research and professional interests revolve around the intersection of historical memory, American history, and the history of African-American experience in Southern California during the 20th century Great Migration and Jim Crow era, heritage conservation, spatial justice, and cultural tourism. She is also interested in her work's intersections with the experiences of people of African descent in other global settings, along with other activities utilizing her knowledge and skills expertise. Professor Jefferson has written a book called Living the California Dream, African-American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era. The study examines how African-Americans pioneered leisure in America's frontier of leisure spaces through their attempts to create communities and business projects in conjunction with the growing African-American population of Southern California during the nation's Jim Crow era. The places Jefferson examines illustrate a range of recreation and relaxation production purposes, societal encounters at beach and inland locations. And we're really excited to have Professor Alison Rose Jefferson with us today.
And hello, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this project.
Professor Jefferson, lots of your research focuses on leisure spaces as contested spaces. Can you speak a bit about that research as a field and why you were drawn to it?
Well, I was interested in the African-American experience at these spaces because they were things that I learned about partially through my family's experience here. And also, I was interested in learning about the African-American community that was in Santa Monica at the beach. And so it evolved from the standpoint of me being interested in place and activities more so than starting the other way around, looking at the frontier of leisure sites. It just happened that they were the frontier of leisure sites. I was interested in learning about the Black middle class and how they, with the California Dream aspirations, participated in that. They moved from mostly Southern places. They were escaping racism and other discriminatory practices. And they came here and they wanted all the benefits of the environment that everybody else wanted. And one of those was to be able to go to the beach and hang out. One of those was to be able to go out to Lake Elsinore. That's a place where my family would go, out to Lake Elsinore. They would go to the beach too, but they had property at Lake Elsinore. And why Lake Elsinore? You know, you think about that from being at UCLA or near the coast, and oh, that's such a long way. That's like 75 miles inland. And then when you go there and you look at the valley, you understand why. Oh, because it was so beautiful and it was hot. And then, you know, other beach spaces in Manhattan Beach and the place that they would go that was kind of in canyons up in the area of Santa Clarita called today Val Verde. And then looking at purchasing land in Corona, the Park Ridge Country Club, an establishment that was developed for white elites, and they couldn't make it happen. And the Black people thought, well, we'll buy it and we'll see if we can make a go of it. And then we will also look at suburban expansion to this community in terms of developing community. So there were lots of reasons to think about these places in terms of the research, and leisure just happened to be the way to enter into the story. And what's interesting too about this is that a lot of people don't think about African Americans and enjoying life. They only think about African Americans being victimized and protesting. And and working to gain their freedom rights. And yes, we have been doing that, but we also had a good time along the way when we could. And so it makes folks more human to think about the broad ways in which they were human beings and citizens, and that they had times where they were just being just like everybody else. They weren't, contesting anything. Well, they were, but they were in a more relaxed way contesting by hanging out at these various places to say that they were entitled to these things and nobody could control their space in terms of their mental space or their physical space, within reason of enjoying these places and just being.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Belmar neighborhood and the South Santa Monica Beach area?
Well, the Belmar area was an area in Santa Monica that is at the edge of the Civic Center campus, and it's situated on the land where the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium is, and their parking lot, and where the courthouse, the LA County Courthouse is, and now a couple of parking lots and a new lab school, and there's a new water treatment place being put in. But originally, the area was the edge of Santa Monica's neighborhood of Ocean Park, which is a little south of Pico. That's, most people think of in the historical terms, they think of Ocean Park as being south of Pico. So it was the edge of the development in the early part of the 20th century, because when you get to where the freeway is, there was a gully that went through there, and the train had a depot right in that area before you got to the gully. So this area was a combination of various people living there as early as the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And there were a couple of blocks where there were a lot of buildings, small apartment buildings, and then there were other blocks where there were houses, and they were big lots, and people had little gardens, and they might have had agriculture. And then eventually, in the later part of the middle part of the 20th century, we get some businesses that are situated there, like a gas station, and there were other businesses earlier, but by the mid 1950s, it was a gas station. The city was leasing some people's yards, some people's lots as maintenance yard and place to store police cars. So most people would, driving out from Los Angeles or taking the streetcar out, would have been coming to the beach. If they were going to get in the water, they would have been changing their clothes someplace. And so La Bonita was one of those kind of places that they could do that. And the business got established there, most likely because that was one of the few places where an African-American business at the edge of the development of the city in terms of the Ocean Park neighborhood could get established. There was a historic church that was established a few blocks away at 4th and Bay Street. They got their first building there, Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, in 1908. And that was the first institutional and spiritual center of the African-American community in Santa Monica that they owned. And there were African-Americans that lived around there as well. So with that, it was a community where, or a neighborhood where African-Americans were able to buy. There weren't restrictive covenants on the property and rent at that part of the century. Those didn't come in until the 1920s. And by the 1920s, the neighborhood there at Belmar, as well as around the church a few blocks away, and then on the north side, the high school, which was a few blocks away in the northern direction, you had other African Americans living in those neighborhoods. And some of those families, we can trace them into the latter part of the 20th century. In terms of the Belmar neighborhood, some of the early families of Santa Monica started out there. And we can trace families like the Spaldings, who their children, few of their children were born when they lived in that neighborhood, and families like the Hensleys. Norman Hensley, he was born in that area. He's still alive. He's in his 80s. Spalding is dead. He was born earlier, but he has descendants that are still alive today, and the businesses that he started as an adult, Spalding Funeral Home, are still establishments that are around in Los Angeles. And then in terms of South Santa Monica, we have the Stout family. They didn't live in the Belmar neighborhood, but they were over around 4th and Bay. Stout, James A. Stout, was the first African-American minister, full-time minister at Phillips Chapel in 1909. And 7 generations of his family have lived in Santa Monica. So he came with his mother-in-law, his wife, and his daughter. And then his daughter had a couple of children. And now that daughter has had a couple of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So some of them all still live in Santa Monica, in the South Santa Monica Beach neighborhood. So the thing that is really amazing about us doing this project is that we get to revisit all this history and share it with a broader public, because I've been looking at this history for like 10 years, and it allows, I think, people to think about their identity and the city in a different way than they may have thought about it before, since we're reinserting this history into the landmark, into the landscape there at the park, and also into just our thinking about history and preserving that history.
So the UCLA History Geography Project often uses this hashtag, locally oriented, and we really believe in the power of local narratives, local stories, local history. And so, Professor Jefferson, I just want to hear a little bit from you about why you think it's important to talk about and to learn local history as it relates to just the general public, and if you have any opinions about K-12 history education as well.
Well, I think it's really important to have local history included in the K through 12 curriculum, because that gives kids a sense of their community in a different way than just experiencing the community. And the context of history is different in every place in the country. Even though there are national laws and there's national history, even national history is local history, because it's happening in a particular place, but it is impacting the greater land base. So for instance, the president getting elected, that's local history from the standpoint that he lives in Washington, D.C. once he's elected, but the policies that he's developing occur all over the country. And this, from the standpoint of local history and our history here in California, there's things that we intersect with in terms of what goes on in terms of national history, but the local history is important too, because it is what also impacts the national history. Laws that happen here, or things, particular events that happen here, are the local stories that contribute to the national narrative about who is an American and the various values of our country that intersect with one another. And because of our experiences here, they're not the same as somebody's experiences growing up in Louisiana, in New Orleans, or somebody growing up in Chicago. We have sunshine for the most part all year round, and our weather is pretty temperate. So that means that there are certain things that we could do here in terms of sports that they can't do in Chicago. we have the beach here where they have some waves. And so we have surfing. In New Orleans, they have beaches and water and, you know, the sea, but they don't have the waves that we have here. So they don't have surfing. They have different eating cultures, lots of different things. So local culture is important to understand, just as national and other regional cultures are important to understand, to help people with their development and understanding the things that are local, as well as national, as well as universal, in terms of our values as people and experiences as people.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you said something about the experiences. You know, you were talking about the difference in experiences, and in the work that we do at the History Project, we are often met with like pretty narrow narratives about Black history, and it's usually positioned, you know, in the secondary level at civil rights, and then that's geographically located in the South, and oftentimes students have a conception of the Black experience during that time as Jim Crow South, segregation, you know, the Selma marches, and the power of of local history is now that they could see that the experience was much more rich and nuanced and diverse than that, and that there are some amazing stories in their own communities, like in South Santa Monica, Belmar Neighborhood, that they could connect with. And what we're encouraging teachers to do is to think about layering in these local narratives into this larger story that they're telling about, you know, Black history or Black experiences in a particular time that they teach. The problem has been that teachers don't have the resources. So we have the new framework that is encouraging us to localize history. The US themes are movement, identity, and citizenship, and the Valmar history is like perfect to explore those themes, but they don't have resources. So we were really excited when you reached out to us about potentially developing some of these lessons. Do you want to talk a little bit about your sort of like goal or hope for these lessons in terms of like local impact, and or anything else that you would want to add about the lessons?
So one of the things that you just said that I want to key in on is thinking about the framework and how the local history is something that is important for developing citizenship, identity, and what was the third one you said?
Movement.
Movement, yes. Citizenship, identity, and movement. Well, one of the things that I am so glad that I had the experience of learning in this process of doing the research was understanding what civil rights look like in California. Because a lot of times I found that people were imposing the practices and policies of the South on California. And so there were some similar things, but the way in which the African American experience happened here with discrimination and segregation was totally different than what happened in Mississippi or Louisiana. And so it's a much more complex milieu to think about how local stories are different, but yet have similarities to other parts of the country. And to look at the people, the individuals who lived through those times and the accomplishments that they had during those times, I think is really important. And it makes it more real, I think, for kids to see people that are from their community in terms of thinking about history and thinking about public policy, than to always be thinking about people that live somewhere else. Now that history is important too, but when you combine all that history together, those different local stories, then you get a more complex national narrative about our lives as Americans and how we got here today, and how all those histories relate to our experiences here today. And, you know, we as historians, we want that. And then we want to take what we've got that we learned about from the past, understand how it impacted us today, and then take that history and then see how we can use that to have a better quality of life for ourselves in the future.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think one of the things that history teachers often hear from students is like, why is this important to me? Why are we learning about this? Why is this important to me? And the power of saying, well, because we're learning about our community. We're learning about our story, the history under our feet. If students have been in this example, Santa Monica or these neighborhoods for generations, then they might be seeing, aunties, uncles, neighbors, loved ones, family members in the history. And that is so powerful. Oftentimes we hear people who are historians who get interested in history in college because they see themselves in a book or in a class. And that's the power of those kinds of stories. We're really excited about these lessons. We were honored that you asked us to collaborate with you, and we tapped into some really talented local teachers, 2 from Santa Monica, Sarah Rodriguez and Adrian Cariati. Sarah wrote one for ethnic studies, a really good lesson that highlights resistance and resilience in the Belmar community. And Adrian's is more of like a mini unit that explores the power of monuments. And it connects to the Belmar installation and then the history as well. And we have a lesson for 3rd and 4th grade developed by Christina Paul, who works at UCLA Lab School. And another one for 8th grade developed by Shomara Gooden, who is a middle school teacher in Linwood. And those lessons are filled with your research. It's a very unique project in that it was written with teachers and a historian. And I don't know if a lot of examples of lessons that have the historian on board with the teachers writing together to develop these lessons. There's some amazing primary sources and photos that we got from your research, and really good literacy strategies for students to engage in. And to do some really rigorous work, and also learning about the power of local history. And, I think some new folks for them to be proud of, and to like you said, enrich the sort of Black experience and Black history. So we're really excited about that. And we know that these lessons are going to be published in the very near future.
Yeah, I was so glad that we were able to do this part of the project in terms of the lesson plan development, because it's really important to have the legacy of the project be extended beyond having an exhibit in a park, and to be able to influence our future leaders of tomorrow. Because these are the kinds of stories that, in terms of what are in the lesson plans, particularly around the different individuals, that I know, as you were just saying, that a lot of graduate students or students in college get interested in history because they read a story and they see themselves in there. Well, the kids, in some of the stories that we tell about the people of Santa Monica, the South Santa Monica neighborhoods, they're going to see themselves and their friends in there. We even have some kids that we talk about in those stories.
And hopefully we have some of that happening at a younger age now. We see, some students will start to have these experiences younger, and hopefully we have more youth interested in history and seeing it as like purposeful and impactful for their immediate, lives and experiences. So again, we're really excited about the lessons, and we can't wait to get them out there. And I just want to thank you for joining us today and talking a little bit about your research and the Belmar History and Art Project. So Professor Jefferson, thank you so much. And we'll see you soon, everyone.
Thanks, guys, for helping. Mark, thanks, Mark, for helping out. And Professor Diaz, thank you very much for inviting me to share with you today about the lesson plans and the project Belmar History plus Art.
Yes.